Hello, everybody. Welcome to The Land, a podcast about basketball in the Borderland. I am your host, Xzavier Cortez, and this is episode 1. On today's episode, it's all about the prospects, the top boys basketball players in the Borderland area. So if this is your first time listening or watching, I recommend going to the homepage of my YouTube channel and you'll find episode 0. I feel like it will be a good buffer for at least these first few episodes. It's only about 28, 29 minutes long. So please go check that out in addition to this episode as well. Now, before we break down the top prospects on the boys' side, I just want to give a small clarifying note on what coverage is going to look like for boys and girls basketball in the Borderland. It is the intended goal of this podcast, my Substack, and the content that I write for Prep Hoops to give equal coverage to the boys and girls side, which I very much intend on doing. So for every article that I write on Prep Hoops, you will see a equal amount of articles on the girls Prep Hoops side going forward. In addition to that, with my Substack, for everything that I write about a boys prospect, a coach, a team, a district, I'm going to be doing the same roughly on the girls side. And the same will be true here on this podcast. Now, that being said, the difference is the coverage will look different. The reason being, I've been covering boys basketball for about a year now. I have a better understanding of the teams, the coaches, the prospects at hand. I've spent as much of my free time going over that and learning about that as I can. On the girls' side, this is my first year covering girls' high school basketball, so I'm still new to it, but I'm playing catch up as fast as I possibly can. That being said, I'm simply not going to talk about certain girls' prospects in the way that I talk about the boys' prospects. And it's going to be pretty evident in this episode because on this episode, I'm going to be talking about the best boys' prospects in terms of tiers, essentially ranking without individually ranking per se. Whereas on episode 2, which will be all about the girls' prospects, I will not be doing a tiered system. The reason being, I just do not feel comfortable immediately coming out with a tiered ranking system or an individual ranking of the girls basketball players when I just haven't seen enough and I haven't seen these players play over multiple times. It would just be disingenuous, I think, to act as if I know more than I actually do. So I'm doing my homework. I'm talking to people that know way more than me about the girls' side, and I will be at as many girls' games this season as I will on the boys' side. So again, please don't be turned off by how the coverage looks or how I kind of differentiate the coverage of the boys and the girls. It's simply just because I've had more time on the boys' side than the girls. But I promise by the end of this season, I will have a girls ranking out along with the boys ranking. But I'm going to treat it the same way. It took me a year before I felt like I could semi-confidently rank the boys prospects. And it's probably going to take me close to a year before I take on that venture on the girls' side. So let's get to it. Okay, so breaking down the boys' top prospects in terms of tiers, I've created 6 tiers for this episode, starting with tier 6, which has the biggest grouping of players, and then tiers 5 through 1 have 5 players each. So in total, that is 40 boys prospects that I'm going to talk about today. Now, I'm not going to talk about every prospect in depth. I think that would just make too long of an episode to begin with. As we go higher up in tier, the more time I'm going to spend with each prospect. Another thing I want listeners to understand about this is that this is really predicated off of the work and the production that players had last season. So this tiered list is not a predictor of how these players are going to play this season necessarily. So you might find and think, well, how is this player in tier 5? He's just as talented as everybody in tier 2 or better than everybody in tier 2. And my response to you would be, yeah, you're probably right. But it's based off of, for the most part, what was their role production last season. For instance, if there's a really talented prospect from the class of 2027 who might have a huge sophomore year and break out and prove that they're a top 10 talent within the city, that's very plausible. But as a freshman, they didn't get much playing time or they were injured. So I'm trying to marry skill set, ability, production from last year, and a bit of projection into this. But for the most part, my basis for ranking these tiers is more or less what they've accomplished within last season and, in a sense, those previous seasons before that. So just to clarify or to get people to understand. So if there's any parents or coaches or players watching this, before you get mad about where a certain player is ranked, this is not a predictor of what's to come for this season. And my 2025 Borderland rankings will not be a copying and pasting of this tiered list. So there's plenty of opportunity for players to move up and down these rankings with what they do this year. So just keep that in mind before we get going. All right, let's do this. Let's start with tier 6. Okay, so here we go. Tier 6 for the Borderland boys prospects. We have 15 here, so I'm just going to run through them really quickly. Carlos Rojas from Riverside, Emmett McDaniel from Oregon Mountain, Carlos Puente from Chapin, Julien Falk-Ramirez from Eastwood, Ethan Pack from Oregon Mountain, Braden Quigley from Eastlake, Tristan Edmond from Eastlake, Quintez Floyd from El Dorado, Trace Huntsman from Centennial, Carmelo Jackson-Hayward from Andrus, Ben Story from Emmanuel Christian, Lenny Oggs from Andrus, Keyshawn Lawrence from Chapin, Mathew Saucedo from Hanks, and Braden Luna from Santa Teresa. So not going to talk about each and every one of these prospects from tier 6 in depth, but there are a few that I want to call your attention to. So Tristan Edmond from Eastlake. Everything that I've heard about this kid in the offseason is that he is going to have a huge sophomore season. He's going to absolutely break out for Eastlake. He came off the bench last year. They had senior guard depth ahead of him, but he's going to move into a starting role, I would assume, at the point guard position. And again, from everybody that I talked to, this kid is going to go off and have a huge season. So what I talked about before I got into this tiered list about how these tiers don't necessarily represent maybe what a player is going to do this year or where they're going to be ranked by 2025, this is what I'm talking about. So Edmond is in tier 6, simply because he was coming off the bench, kind of like in a 6-man role last year, but he was not Eastlake's most impactful or pivotal player. I wouldn't even say he was one of their top 4 guys last year. Again, not because of a lack of talent, but just because of the senior depth that they had ahead of him and the upperclassmen depth that they had ahead of him. But Tristan Edmond, by all accounts, is going to have a huge season at Eastlake. Carlos Rojas, who makes this list for Riverside simply because this is just one of the better athletes in all of the Borderland. He's actually a much better football prospect by all estimation for Riverside. He's already gotten a lot of D1 offers coming off a phenomenal freshman year. That kid on the basketball court, though, is pretty impactful for Riverside. So if he decides to play basketball, I think Riverside's going to have an excellent 4-year player going forward. Another one is Carlos Puente from Chapin. Again, somebody who, if he stayed healthy his freshman year, would have seen minutes for Chapin High School. And if you know how loaded that program is, to get minutes as a freshman speaks to your talent level. So if he can stay healthy, I would assume he's going to move into a starting position. And if not a starting position, he's going to be like first guy off the bench for Chapin this year. So if he's healthy, if he's ready to go, there's a lot of high hopes for him at Chapin High School out in the Northeast this year. Another one is Julien Falk-Ramirez from Eastwood. Again, played spot minutes on varsity for Eastwood as a freshman. very similar player to his brother. They kind of molded in the same vein, certainly have some differences, but Eastwood's going to be a strong contender to win the 6A district title this year. And for that to happen, we're going to have to see a breakout sophomore year from Julien Falk-Ramirez. Does he need to be, the best player on Eastwood? Absolutely not. That's his brother that's going to take over. That's going to, continue in that role. Does he have to be the second best player? I don't even think so. But third best player, fourth best player on some nights. I'm assuming he's moving into the starting position. So it's going to be a very interesting sophomore year for him. And assuming he does move into a starting position, I think him and his brother are going to play off each other fantastically. Another one is Carmelo Jackson-Hayward from Andrews. 6'6", can finish above the rim. Height, weight, frame is a mismatch for a lot of people. If he can stay healthy this year, and if the commitment to basketball is there, this kid's going to be a problem within 5A basketball, I think, his senior year. And hopefully he'll come onto some recruiters' radar if he can have a full season and just play. Next is Mathew Saucedo. So Saucedo was a transfer midseason last year from Mountain View to Hanks. He did not play the remainder of season for Hanks, but I believe he'll be back this year. He is a player that flashed a lot of interesting offensive potential for Mountain View, but maybe just didn't have the right structure to play within that maximized his ability. So transferring to Hanks, I think, will be beneficial for Saucedo. And if he, had a strong offseason, he trained hard, and I'm assuming he would move into a starting role or have a chance to be a starter for Hanks, I think he's going to help replace some of that senior talent that they lost last year. Okay, next up, let's go to Tier 5. Okay, so Tier 5 prospects, we have Marcus Bennett from Eastwood. Bennett was ranked 36 on my 2024 Borderland 50 rankings for last season. He's a returning wing for the Eastwood Troopers, a huge returning player, very pivotal. He's going to impact the 6A title race mightily. Obviously, when you think about Eastwood basketball right now on the boys' side, you think about Devin Falk-Ramirez and how impactful he is, and that's totally understandable. But Marcus Bennett is firmly their second best player if we're going off what he did last season. Versatile defender, guards up and down the lineup for them, strong rebounder for them as well, gives them some much needed height for the kind of 3-4 position. If he can just maximize his minutes this year, stay out of foul trouble, improve the perimeter shooting, kind of take some of that scoring load off of Devin Falk-Ramirez, I think he'll have a terrific senior year. But, regardless of how it goes, this is one of the more important players returning to 6A basketball in El Paso. Next is Darion Mitchell from Franklin, another senior. I have him listed as a guard, a 2 guard. Could play the 3 for Franklin. Mitchell was not ranked for me last year, mainly because he played behind guard depth. There was guard depth ahead of him that just had more responsibility. But essentially, Franklin's 3 best players have either graduated and then 1 transferred. So Mitchell, a lot's going to fall on him. But with that, he's going to have a lot of opportunity to show out. He'll have more scoring opportunities. And I think that's going to show this year. And from what I've read and heard, he had a pretty good summer out in the AAU circuit. So look out for Darion Mitchell from Franklin. Next is Jovanni Ortiz from Canutillo. This is a 2026 prospect who just missed out on the top 50 rankings last season. If you know anything about Canutillo basketball, they had some of the best depth in the Borderland last season. Some of that depth is graduating, so naturally a player like Ortiz is going to assume more responsibility, have more opportunities to score, to possibly play make. They'll rely on his length, his defense. I think he's going to have a much improved junior year, and I think he will impact the race in 5A basketball in terms of what team finishes second. Next is Xzavier Stewart from Chapin. Stewart is somebody I have listed as a small forward at 3, but he could easily play at the guard position. It would be my assumption, and I'm not basing this necessarily off of any reporting, but I would assume Stewart would take up a starting position this year as a junior. If Chapin decides to play 4 guards with Jayden Leverett at center, I think you could possibly pencil in Stewart as that small ball 4 for them. His defense is going to keep him on the floor this year. Anytime he got minutes for Chapin last year, the kid was just hustle and intensity on the defensive end for Chapin. So I think he's going to continue to fit in with what made Chapin so dominant over these last 4 years within their pressing system. How much will Chapin press under Tevin Caldwell? Who knows? But you have to imagine they're going to do it to some extent. And so I think Stewart's going to have a huge impact, especially on the defensive end, come this season. Last player from Tier 5 is Ray Venegas from Oregon Mountain. So Venegas is somebody at 6'4", slots into the power forward position, can play the 3, or depending if Oregon Mountain wants, he can play at their 5, being 6'4" in the Borderland. That height frame kind of already constitutes you to play as a 4 or a 5. Oregon Mountain lost some top tier talent. So he was already the 3rd leading scorer on the team last season. So naturally you just assume that he's going to take on a bit more. Could very easily be the leading scorer for a returning Oregon Mountain team that will be the favorites to win their district in Las Cruces and make a deep playoff run in the state of New Mexico. So, considering the talent loss, Venegas is going to have even more opportunity. I had him ranked 45th last year, or for last season, rather. Okay, so now let's move on to tier number 4. Okay, so first player on tier 4 is Jazhiel Herrera from Coronado. So Herrera is a very interesting prospect because last season he played for Franklin High School, who won a co-share of the 6A district title. I thought he was their second best player. He's a low-key, really a good, strong athlete, has good burst, decent verticality, can shoot from the outside, likes to get to the rim too. When he's challenged defensively, he's pretty stout, he's pretty strong. But the big news, obviously, with him is transferring out of Franklin. I think that impacts Franklin heavily. But also he's transferring to the rival school down the street in Coronado. I think he's going to help out the T-Birds tremendously. How he's going to fit in on that roster, that will be interesting. I had him ranked 33rd last season. Next is Donovan Mozer from Canutillo. I have him listed as a 2 guard. I think that's appropriate for him at the high school level. Again, he was part of that great Canutillo depth last season. Some of that's going to change. I think he's going to assume more responsibility. Some people would say he's Canutillo's best player. He's certainly one of their top 2 players, in my opinion. I had him ranked 37th last year. It will be interesting to see if he has more on-ball responsibility. I think with that, whether he plays on the ball more or less, he's going to have a lot more opportunities to score the ball and show out. He's an excellent athlete. That really shows out in transition, out in space. So look out for Donovan Mozer in his senior year. Next up is Julian Pacheco from Chapin, another senior. He was their starting point guard last year. I had him ranked 30th. Just a rock-solid player. Fit into that system very well. When he had his opportunities offensively, he helped them from a perimeter scoring perspective. Hustled hard, played great in their pressing system defensively. Really what makes Chapin great is just their depth of talent, and Pacheco embodies that to the highest degree. So I think you're finding one of the more steady point guards in the area. I think Pacheco is going to have a continuation of his junior year and just be even the slightest bit more efficient with his play. Next up is Hector Perez from Emmanuel Christian. So Perez comes from a private school. Nevertheless, I had him ranked 35th last year. I have him categorized as a combo guard. If I had to pick one position, he's a point guard, obviously at 5'10", but he's a good enough outside shooter that depending on scheme or roster, he could play off the ball and you could rely on him to catch and shoot. or not necessarily have the ball in his hands, but he's a scoring point guard for Emmanuel Christian. And do the Warriors play against top level competition week in, week out? Absolutely not. But if he did not play at Emmanuel Christian, he could start at most programs in the Borderland. And against public school competition, he showed out. He's had some pretty good games. So again, I think Perez he's going to come back and he's going to have some pretty ridiculous scoring games his senior year. Some of those games are going to be against lower level competition, but he's going to show himself against some varsity level public schools that might surprise some people. So Hector Perez is somebody to keep an eye out on. Last player from Tier 4 is Damiran Smith from Alamogordo High School. He's their best returning player. I had him ranked 29th last year. 6'3", really stout frame, can guard up and down the lineup. One of the better defenders in the Borderland in terms of his versatility, his rebounding. If the offensive game continues to progress, if the mid-range jumper starts to fall, he's going to put up some pretty impressive numbers for Alamogordo this year. What their team success will look like this year, we'll see how that goes. They lost some pretty important senior talent, but Smith, just as an individual, I think is going to have an excellent season for the Tigers. Okay, next up we have tier number 3, and here we're now starting to get into a higher degree of talent and prospects going forward. So not that players from tier 4, tier 5, or tier 6 won't be in the discussion, but really based on skill set, ability, production, or all three coming into this season, that's what you're going to see with tier 3 and on up. So let's get to it. Okay, first player on tier 3, I have Austin Bonilla from Canutillo High School. I think he's their best returning player. I thought he was their best player last year anytime I went out and watched them. The obvious thing that stands out about Bonilla is that he's 5'2". To my knowledge, he is the shortest starting varsity player in boys basketball in the Borderland at 5'2". And you would think that at 5'2", there are limitations to his game because of his height. But the more you watch him, his 5'2" frame actually works for him in much more positive ways than it does in negative ways. Number one, he's one of the more reliable ball handlers. He's very hard to get the ball off of. Not saying he doesn't create turnovers, but you're not going to be picking this kid's pocket up and down the floor. He's very hard to press as well. And he's an excellent playmaker to go with it. One of the top assisters that the Borderland has. And then if you give him space, if you allow him to get his shot, he will score the ball. So I think Canutillo is going to have another really strong season, and it's going to be predicated off of what Bonilla can do. I had him ranked 32nd last season. Next up is Johan Camacho from Bowie High School. So Camacho is a dual sport athlete. He's a star player for the Bowie football team. That actually might be his best sport. Who knows? But on the basketball court, he is one of the most physically imposing players the Borderland has, and he's tough to deal with. And considering that Bowie plays in 4A, not necessarily the highest level of competition compared to 5A basketball, 6A basketball, he feasts against opponents. He gobbles up points and rebounds, double-double type of kid. So even if he wasn't at Bowie, this kid would be finding a way to impact other programs, regardless of district, regardless of team. So if he comes in healthy after football season, he's going to have a huge junior year. Last season, I had him ranked 20th. Next up is Cason Golding. He's a senior shooting guard from Coronado. Last year, I had him ranked 27th. So Golding's an interesting prospect. He's another football player, I believe a team captain for Coronado, so he obviously takes that sport very seriously. For those who don't know, his father is the head coach of the UTEP men's basketball program. Should be obvious by the last name. Now, Golding, I believe, to my recollection, only played 6 games last year. So you might be thinking, how can you have this kid ranked so high when he only played 6 games? It's very simple. When you watch the tape on this kid, he has a very elite skill set. His proficiency and ability to catch and shoot is elite. It's actually probably better than any prospect on this list. When you watch these prospects in person or on tape, it's very seldom that you find somebody coming off screens, catching and shooting, no dribble, one dribble, ball right in the shooting pocket, ready to go. This kid has that. So that's a very high degree of difficulty skill set that to me stands out. And again, really, I think the thing that was mitigating the fact that he didn't produce last year was injury, not because of a skill set deficiency. So I think if he comes in healthy, in addition to what Coronado has picked up with players transferring, Coronado might have a pretty big year in 6A basketball if they can get this kid on the floor and he can play consistently. Again, very elite skill set for the area. Next is Ryu Nunez from Del Valle. So, again, we have another football player on this list, but he had an excellent junior year for the Del Valle basketball team. He was their best player, undoubtedly. I had him listed as a wing. Obviously, he can play as a 2. I had him ranked 23rd last year. I think one thing that makes Nunez really high on my list is that he has this pretty decently refined ability to get to his spots. There were times in certain possessions or time and score moments in games last year for Del Valle where they needed to get a bucket. They needed to maximize an offensive possession and get one of the better shots. And usually that came through Nunez and his ability to get to his mid-range jumper right in around the nail area, just inside the free throw line, 14, 15 feet. He could consistently and comfortably get to that spot over and over. And again, at this level, that is not something that you see every prospect has. Every top player on a team has that ability to do that. He's a really strong athlete too, has good defensive upside too. So really it's just a matter of, can he come in healthy, fully engaged after a football season to really maximize what he can do on the basketball court. Last up from tier 3 is CJ Quirino from Pebble Hills. So this kid hasn't been able to see much of the court over the past year or so. Did not have a junior year, was injured. I had him ranked 31st in spite of that. Quirino, to me, still makes this list and is on this tier because the talent is obvious. Now, you talk to some people, and I think there's a natural skepticism because where he was at as a sophomore and now where will he be as a senior, that's a huge gap in playing where other people from his class maybe have surpassed him or caught him. That's some of the talk that you hear, but then you have other people who still very much see what he did as a sophomore and look and undeniably has a certain skill set and talent with the ball in his hands that makes him a top prospect. That's why I have him here. And I really just feel like if he's healthy, he's going to have a phenomenal senior year and he's going to show that he is one of the elite prospects in this area because he can do some pretty impressive things with the ball in his hands. So if he's healthy, I think he's going to show out this year. Okay, next up, we got tier 2. Okay, tier 2 prospects. First up, we have Azaiah Carbajal from Socorro High School. He's their starting point guard. I had him ranked 18th last year. And Carbajal is somebody that I watched early in the 2023-24 season. Didn't have a bad game, but also didn't play a great game. And he just kind of flew under my radar until I was told by some people that are way smarter than me that have watched these players way longer than me that, hey, you should go back and watch Carbajal again. You should give this kid a second chance. And when I went back and watched tape on him, yeah, this kid is one of the more special players with the ball in his hands. Probably has one of the better step back jump shots in the Borderland. He can do some pretty impressive things from behind the 3-point line. So he's somebody I would really recommend to go watch in person because, you'll be watching the game and then all of a sudden he'll just kind of dazzle you with some type of move or some type of shot. And it's kind of unexpected. He's somewhat of an unassuming prospect, if you will. But the kid is impressive. And Socorro High School kind of had a tough go at it last year, but they're going to be a much improved team this year. And they have a better roster this year. But I think also just Carbajal coming back, playing with a better roster around him. And I think he's going to have a pretty big senior year. So Carbajal is definitely, if you're interested to go watch some of these prospects in person, Carbajal is definitely one of them. Next is Jacob Garcia from Chapin. Last year I had Garcia ranked 25th. He came off the bench for the Huskies last year. He was kind of their pseudo sixth man. Really, the big thing about Garcia and why I think he's a really special talent for the class of 2026 is just his poise and his mentality when he steps onto the court. He's really somebody that does not shy away from the moment, which was very evident in Chapin's playoff run last year. I mean, he was their best player at some points late in the season. So, don't be fooled by the fact that he came off the bench. This kid played crunch time for Chapin as a sophomore. So he was taking away minutes from upperclassmen as a sophomore at Chapin. That's big. That means something. So I would assume he's going to start this year in some capacity. Where he starts as their point guard, two guard, who knows? Again, I'm assuming Chapin's going to have a very guard heavy lineup because that's where most of their depth is at this year. I think he's just going to be terrific for Chapin and undoubtedly one of the top prospects in the class of 2026. So look out for Garcia going forward. Next is Brody John from El Paso High. He's a small forward, 6'4". This kid just has a lot of high upside on the offensive end too. 6'4", ball skills, can shoot. When he's on, when he's playing well, when the game is coming to him, you're going to find one of the best wing scorers that the Borderland has to offer. What keeps him just outside of tier 1 is just consistency. Can he consistently have a high output? Not in terms of just points, but engagement, effort, staying within the games mentally. If he can do all those things along with the scoring acumen that he already has, man, this kid he'll have a big senior season. El Paso High lost some really important wing depth that really rounded out their group last year. So naturally, you would assume more of that is going to fall on John. So if he can just have a certain level of efficiency within his shot volume and consistency in terms of effort and engagement, man, this kid he'll have a monster senior year. Next up is Derek Mendez from Eastlake. He's a 2 guard who I had ranked 22nd last year. Mendez is one of the better two-way prospects. He really, in my opinion, stands out defensively in terms of his effort and engagement. He's one of those players that guards end-to-end or 94 feet or 90 feet, however big a high school basketball court is. He guards end-to-end with a lot of intensity. Point of attack defender, can guard up, really limit a ball handler's space and not get into foul trouble, which is rare. Good lateral quickness. Offensively, this kid's a gunner. The kid is not afraid to shoot the ball from 3. Really, I think for him, it's just a matter of becoming a more efficient shooter and having better shot selection, which I think he's going to round out this year. And I think Eastlake is actually going to have better guard play this year too, with Tristan Edmond sliding in. And they had pretty good guard play last year too. So if Mendez can round out that offensive efficiency, have better shot selection, this kid is one of the better two-way prospects this area has to offer. Last up is Anthony Rubio from Burgess High School. So Rubio is a very, very interesting prospect and player. Really, since he's came into varsity basketball as a freshman, he's shown that he's one of the more talented scorers this area has to offer. At 6'4", 6'5", still growing, has pretty decent ball skills, can shoot the ball. He just has a fluency with scoring the ball that has always been he's always been beyond his age in terms of what he can do as a scorer from what he showed as a freshman and as a sophomore. So the talent is absolutely there for Rubio. The upside is absolutely there for Rubio. I think what keeps Rubio from being a tier 1 prospect is matching the talent and upside with a certain level of effort and engagement, especially defensively. Now, I've seen this kid, when he's challenged defensively, he can hold his own. And at 6'4" with a lot of length, he's not necessarily somebody easy to score on, but there's a different level of intensity that he plays the game with offensively and defensively. So if this kid maxes out his potential, gives 100% effort on both ends, and is not just such a focused scorer, this is a Division I talent. But a big but is that has to happen for him to be that type of player. And this is going to be an interesting final 2 years for Rubio because so much of his pedigree has been based off of his remarkable scoring talent for being so young. But he's not young anymore. He's a junior now. He's an upperclassman, and you have certain expectations of an upperclassman, of a junior, of a senior. So, these final 2 years are pivotal for him. So if he can just match the talent and upside with effort and engagement, man, this kid is going to have a really, really big junior year. And, I think Burgess should be a more competitive team this year. They should be playing more competitive basketball late into games this year than they did last year. But it's going to start with Rubio and the type of tone that he sets, but undeniable talent, that is for sure. Okay, so next up is the final tier, the tier 1 talent. I'm really going to try to break down these last 5 players in depth and kind of tell you why they're separated from the rest of the pack, and just what makes them the elite of elite talents. These are players that I've watched as much as I can within the year and a half that I've been covering in person on tape. I've talked to as many people that I possibly can that I have contacts with about these kids. How do they train? What's their work ethic like? Where's their skill set lie? How have they progressed over the years? So I'm not the authority on these players by no means, but I've tried to do my homework on these players as best as I can to give you guys a better understanding of why they belong in this tier. And honestly, this was the easiest tier to create. You can debate and squabble about, is this player in tier 2 or tier 5 or tier 3 or tier 6, whatever. It's really hard to argue against these 5 as tier 1 talents, in my opinion. So I'll get into why that is. So the tier 1 talents, I have Devin Falk-Ramirez from Eastwood High School, Savion Jordan from Chapin High School, Jayden Leverett from Chapin High School, Azaiah Thompson from Ysleta, and Lenny Washington from Oregon Mountain. So I'm going to go from the top down to the bottom, and just so people understand, this is not a 1 through 5. That's not how it's organized. It's organized alphabetically by last name for this tier. So don't get confused by the order that I talk about them again. I'm going to have my individual rankings out in 2025. This is just a tiered ranking where I have all 5 of these players. So we'll start from top to the bottom. So first up, Devin Falk-Ramirez from Eastwood High School. Last year, his overall rank was 5th. Class ranking for the class of 2025 is 3, and his positional ranking, I had him listed as a point guard. He could play at the 2, but he is a point guard. He was my number 1 rated point guard for the 2023-2024 season. So some key attributes about Falk-Ramirez. 1, two-way effort and engagement. When you go watch Falk-Ramirez, he's not the type of player that takes possessions off. You're not going to forget where he's at offensively, and he's not going to be slacking or moving with less effort defensively. It is two-way effort with this kid. He has a lot of offensive responsibility for Eastwood, and then conversely on the defensive end, he is their point of attack defender, high level engagement, effort is always there. This kid does not take plays off. And I bring that up as a first key attribute because there are not a lot of players like that in this area, not even some of the top boys talent that have that type of two-way effort and engagement. So that's a big one. Next, poised and controlled. He plays at his own pace. He doesn't get sped up. He doesn't get slowed down. He doesn't let his frustration show on the court. So when I go watch prospects, I look at body language. How do players respond when they miss a shot? How do players respond when one of their teammates turns a ball over or misses a wide open shot? What happens when you go down by 10? What happens when the team goes on a run? You know, basketball is a sport of runs. And there are some prospects who let negative play seep into their game. This kid really not at all. So very poised, very controlled, mentally tough. Next, he's highly efficient. Eastwood plays a slower, more methodical brand of basketball in the half court on offense than other teams do. They don't take bad shots. They don't rush shots. Obviously, no shot clock. You don't have to. And so they maximize offensive possessions probably as well as anybody in the Borderland. And a lot of that is predicated off of Devin Falk-Ramirez. He usually has the ball in his hand every single possession. And if he's not shooting the ball, he is playmaking or setting up shots for other people. But he's a highly, highly efficient scorer. Last year, he shot 60% on 2-point field goals as a guard. That's a pretty insane number. But it's also, you understand that number through the type of offensive system. So the way Eastwood plays offensively and Falk-Ramirez's skill set, it's actually a really strong marriage of those two. Next, he's a 3-level scorer. He's somebody who can shoot from the perimeter, shoot from the 3-point line, has a very solid mid-range game. He has a nice right-handed floater that he can hit attacking downhill or coming from the baseline. Will get to the rim, will try to finish at the rim, can finish at the rim, strong free throw shooter. So he kind of checks the boxes and, again, lets the game come to him. If there are driving opportunities, he's going to drive. If he sees an opportunity to pull up, he's going to pull up. If he has an opportunity to score from 3, he'll take that as well. So very strong 3-level scorer. Next, he's a high usage shot creator. So like I said, a lot of the offense runs through Devin Falk-Ramirez. He has the ball in his hands every possession, obviously is the point guard, but in the half court setting, the ball will come back to him. But as a high usage player with Falk-Ramirez, he's not like a 25, 30 shots a game type of guy. He gets the ball out. He disseminates. He pushes to other people. He creates so many shots for his fellow teammates within the system that they run. So somebody who's going to have the ball a lot, but knows how to disperse it and get it to his other teammates. That's very important. Growth areas. So I don't want people to take this necessarily as this is where his game is weak. It's just a matter of some of these might be weak areas, but other things might be he just hasn't had opportunities to show it within high school basketball. And again, that's really my perspective on these prospects. I don't see them out in the summer circuit. I'm really evaluating based on their high school tape and performance. So growth areas can have a double meaning of maybe it is an area where they need to improve, or it's just an area where they need opportunity to show themselves. So growth areas for Devin Falk-Ramirez, I think an uptick in shooting volume. My only kind of critique of him last season was at the beginning of the season where it seemed like he just wasn't aggressive enough looking for a shot late in games when he was clearly Eastwood's best option coming down the floor. You want your best players dictating play, which he did, but you also want your best players taking the last shots and being relied on. And I'm not sure if he was fully comfortable in that at the beginning of last season from the games that I watched. But by the end of the season, you could count on Falk-Ramirez taking the most important shots, making the most important shots for Eastwood last season. But what I would like to see his senior year is another uptick in volume. So, in my opinion, he should be taking as many shots as a Anthony Rubio from Burgess or a Brody John from El Paso or a Azaiah Thompson from Ysleta, who we're going to get to. So uptick in volume. I think the more shots he's taking, the more he's looking for a shot, the better off Eastwood's going to be. Next is shooting off the dribble. So again, I'm not saying this is an area of Falk-Ramirez's game where he's weak per se, but it's an area of his game that I would like to see expanded. When he's scoring the ball, like I said, he's somebody who can score at all three levels, but it's very seldom that you find him shooting off the dribble per se. If he's behind the 3-point line, it's more in catch and shoot opportunities, or if he has the space to get a shot off, then he'll take a 3-point shot. The mid-range game is there, but again, you don't see it off the dribble. If he has a lot of space to attack, he's going to drive to the rim. And again, he likes that right-handed floater, but I want to see what the jump shooting looks like off the dribble this year and slightly higher volume. I want to see if there's a deeper fluency and a proficiency with shooting off the dribble. That'll be interesting to see. Next is improved athleticism. So this kid is undoubtedly an excellent athlete. He's also a track star for Eastwood as well, but I want to see if he can put his physical attributes and imprint that into a game, into his game, and impact the players around him, both on his team and the players going up against him. I think one of the reasons why I had him 5th last year, which is obviously not a bad ranking, he's one of the elite talents, but when I had to pick and choose as to why I had some prospects ranked ahead of him, even though he's probably the most valuable player and even though he's the most efficient player, is athletic attributes, where I felt like there were other prospects who were slightly better athletes than him. But again, I've done my homework on this kid. He's a very good athlete. He gets it done in multiple sports. So it's seeing him impose himself physically is where I think that's going to be important for him going forward. Next is playing faster. Again, this isn't necessarily a weak point, but I just want to see what he looks like if he playing with more tempo at times. And again, a lot of this is going to be predicated off of how he gets to play with an Eastwood system. But when I'm looking at prospects, I'm seeing what they can do in different and various areas. So I know he's highly efficient and methodical and smart in his shot selection and play within Eastwood's half-court offense, playing slowly and methodically. But can he do it playing faster? Can he do it in a up-tempo situation? And again, from everybody that I've talked to, he absolutely can do that. But I would like to see if that's possible in high school basketball play. Lastly is playing off ball. So again, this isn't one of those things where I don't think he can't do it. I actually think he has a fair amount of experience doing it, especially in AAU basketball from time to time. But with his brother coming into the starting lineup, or assuming he's coming into the starting lineup, they're going to share backcourt responsibilities. Obviously, Devin's going to have the ball in his hand for the most part. But I think at this point, he's better than his brother on ball, but he's also better than his brother off the ball too. So can he maximize his efficiency and his ability when he's playing off the ball as well? So again, for Falk-Ramirez, it's not a lot of like obvious major weak points. It's just, can he do these other things in addition to the things that he does really well? So that's Devin Falk-Ramirez. Okay, next up we have Savion Jordan from Chapin High School. Last season I had him ranked 9th overall, 4th in the class of 2025, and 3rd positionally I had Jordan listed as a shooting guard. So key attributes for Jordan. Number 1, this is one of the best athletes playing high school basketball in the Borderland, bar none. You can argue about where he ranks amongst those elite players, but he's one of those elite athletes. He was a really talented football prospect, but he decided to not play football this season, focus strictly on basketball. And I think that's going to pay dividends for this kid. Elite athlete, though. Next, in addition to being an elite athlete, he's a defensive playmaker. In Chapin's pressing system last year, the kid created so many turnovers, and he's so great kind of roving and roaming in space and seeing where that next pass is coming from. The kid can just gobble up steals. So you put him in a pressing system, hell, you even put him man-to-man, the kid's pretty solid. Next, explosive finisher. So again, dovetailing with that elite athleticism. This is a kid who can get to the rim, can blow by defenders, but finish on top of defenders too. He's a above the rim finisher when he has the runway. That is rare. That is unique for prospects in this area. There's only a handful who can really do that in game, like Jordan. Next, he flashes perimeter scoring. So that's the part of his game that I think he's been trying to refine over this offseason. And from what I've heard, you're going to see a much better perimeter scorer going forward. And he showed that in flashes last year. Off the dribble, mid-range, pull-up, stuff like that. Next, this kid's a winning player. Yes, he plays for a winning program, but with a player like Jordan, if you understand the situation that he was in last year, plays on the best team in the area, plays on a team that is absolutely stacked with talent, both in the starting lineup and on the bench, and plays on the team with an insane amount of depth at the guard position. This kid really, like a lot of those kids on that program, sacrificed. If you put Savion Jordan on any other Borderland program, he's going to score way more points, and he's arguably the best player. And even in spite of the fact that he had to share shots, minutes with other players, I just think his attitude and his disposition, like I never saw that affected. Like I never saw somebody who got subbed out and then when he got subbed in, he was just a different guy. Like there was an obvious sacrifice that players like him on that Chapin squad needed to make. And I think that speaks to Chapin's culture, but the individual as well, because that's not easy for a 16, 17-year-old to do, especially when you're a talent like Jordan, who, again, could start and play anywhere and be a leading scorer basically anywhere. That was a sacrifice on that Chapin squad. And every time I watch him play, high-level effort, highly engaged, and made his bones defensively on a team offensively where it could be anybody on any given night. So those are the key attributes for Jordan. Next, growth areas. So perimeter jump shooting. So again, I think he showed it in flashes, but that was an area of his game in the half court that needed refinement. So if the jumper has improved this offseason, watch out. He's going to be very hard to guard because one, if you guard up on him, he's going to get by you. He has one of the quicker first steps in the game in this area. But if you're going to allow him space or allow him to get comfortable off the dribble and he can make those shots, man, he's going to be tough to guard for just about anybody. Next is ball handling. Again, he plays as a two guard, but I think that's somewhat of a function of his skill set, but also a function of Chapin just has an insane amount of guards and somebody has to play off ball. That being said, I think the ball handling can improve. I think it could be a little tighter, a little cleaner crossing over. You know, when the game gets kind of frantic and hectic and the pace is up and down and turnovers are happening, you know, the ball handle could be a little bit loose for him. So hopefully that can improve too. Next is controlled pace. And this is not necessarily a weakness, I would say, for Jordan. It's just anytime you have a player with elite speed or burst, it's about learning how to shift in and out of certain gears, knowing when to play fast, knowing when to downshift and play slower. So not necessarily a weakness per se, but if Jordan has the ball in his hands, it's throttling correctly with that speed I think that will just make him an even more dangerous player. Next is a defined position. So what I mean by this more or less is maybe a projection kind of going forward for him at the next level. Is he a guard that is going to have the ball in his hands? Is he more of a point guard naturally outside of the function of where he exists on the Chapin team? Or is he a two guard? Or is he kind of both? Is he a combo? But either way, a one, a two, or a combo, can he have a more defined position and skill set with that position? I think that will be important for him as he enters college. And then lastly, just higher usage. So again, this isn't a weak point, but I think he's going to have more shots, more opportunities this year. And hopefully with that higher usage, because, shows a more proficient and efficient player. So I think if he gets an uptick in volume, then, you're going to see somebody who's going to contend for a lot of postseason awards that are given out. Because again, the kid has a lot of upside, a lot of talent. And like I said, he's one of the best athletes the sport has right now. So that's Savion Jordan. Next up, another Chapin Husky is Jayden Leverett from, of course, Chapin High School. So last year I had him ranked second overall, top player from the class of 2025, and obviously the top center playing in all of the Borderland by a fairly wide gap. Key attributes: he is an unmatchable matchup, meaning we quite literally do not have another player 6'10", 6'11" that has Jordan's frame or game. So quite literally every time he steps out onto the court in the Borderland, he's a immediate mismatch that you cannot match with size. So that proves to be very beneficial. Next is his frame and his athleticism. So it's one thing to be 6'10", 6'11", and be on a basketball court. It's another thing to have that type of frame and have it match with a certain level of athleticism. This kid is an athlete, and you can't take that for granted at that height. I've only been covering high school basketball for about a year now, year and a half, but I have experience covering basketball at the collegiate level too. And height does not immediately translate to having skill or the ability to move a body of that size around competently. And I think Leverett has that. He has an unmatchable frame, but he is an athletic prospect to go along with that. And I think that's what makes him dangerous and somebody with a tremendous amount of upside. The next up, he's the right type of finisher. So his finishing skills have been something that he's been steadily improving on. So what I mean by that is when he has the opportunity to finish, dunk the ball, finish with strength, he will, and he does. So he has the right mentality as somebody at 6'10", 11 on how you need to finish around the rim. That's important. Next, he's competent in space. So obviously, Chapin is always going to be in the best position from a defensive perspective when this kid is guarding at the rim. But I've seen him guard out in space, and he can do it. He's more than competent. I've seen him block jump shooters out on the perimeter multiple times in a game all throughout the season last year. So he's not somebody at the high school level that you can exploit per se, or put him in a pick and roll and guard out on the perimeter and think you got this huge mismatch. You really don't. Because again, it speaks to that frame and that athleticism that he has to go with it. And then lastly, it's high upside. It's hard to argue that there's a prospect in the area right now that has more upside than Leverett, which I think is evident in how heavily he's being recruited this far. He's the only prospect that's being recruited at the Division I level as it stands. I don't think he's the only Division I talent, but he's the only one being recruited at that level. And not only is he being recruited at that level, he's being recruited at a national level by Power 5 schools. So it's not just the hometown programs like UTEP and NMSU that are vying after him. It's Texas Tech, it's Texas, Mississippi State, Oklahoma State, like legitimate collegiate basketball programs at the highest level. So a year from now, you're going to be seeing this kid play collegiate basketball at the top level for what I would assume is going to be a top Power 5 program. And again, a lot of that is predicated off of the upside that this kid has, and he's still developing and growing. Next are growth areas for Leverett. So staying healthy is number one. He missed some time last year, not a lot. At the end of the day, he was on the court when Chapin needed him in the playoffs. So I'm not really all concerned about will he be on the court, will he not be on the court this year, but it matters. And hopefully and ideally you want to see him play a full season of healthy basketball and have the best possible senior year that he can. So staying healthy is important. Absorbing contact, which he has certainly improved on. You go crunch the tape from him in his sophomore year, then go watch him in his junior year. And number one, he grew about 3 more inches, but his ability to absorb contact was much improved, but he can still stand to improve about absorbing contact. Next within that is initiating physicality. Now this is tough and it dovetails with the 4th point in the growth areas, navigating officiating, because I think that he needs to play with a certain level of physicality considering his size and his frame. He is not a perimeter player. His game should not revolve around jump shooting, and I'm not saying it will, but it should be around dominating in a position in the low to mid to pinch post areas, and initiating the physicality that's going to come with it. That being said, being that he's 6'10", and also acknowledging that officiating at the high school level can be problematic at times, not to get into that. It's a fine line because players like Leverett are not really officiated very fairly or competently. And it has a lot to do with he's such an overmatching player because of his size that he can get officiated somewhat unfairly from time to time if you have refs that don't really understand how to understand what he's doing on a basketball court. And, reffing is hard enough as it is, so I'm not trying to put any of the local officials down. But I've seen games where refs give his opponents the benefit of the doubt because he's 5, 6, 7 inches taller than him. So because of that, he's the one who gets in foul trouble. So it's a fine line between him initiating physicality and navigating efficiency. And then lastly, it's just a dominant mindset. You talk to anybody around the Chapin program, the one big word that a lot of them use when talking about Leverett is being dominant. He should be dominant in his senior year, and I tend to agree because, again, it's like I said, he's an unmatchable matchup with a frame and a athleticism to go with that frame that this area does not have. So he needs to take advantage of that, and he should be the most dominant player in this area, not only because he's just tall and he's bigger than everybody, but he has a skill set that goes in conjunction with that frame. So it's going to be interesting to see the type of year that Leverett has, and I think he's going to be incredible for Chapin. And if you want to go watch boys high school basketball and you want to see fun players to watch, there's not really anybody doing what Jayden Leverett can do on a basketball court. So very highly recommend you go check out Leverett. Next up, Azaiah Thompson from Ysleta. So Thompson, he's more of a wing, somebody who can play the 2, play the 3. Last year, I had him ranked 3rd overall, 2nd in the class of 2025, and 1st at his position. Last year, I believe I had him listed as a small forward. But you could have argued that he would have been the top shooting guard last season too, if that's how I had him listed. Key attributes, two-way upside. What I mean by that is the kid has really impressive flashes of just high upside on both ends as a scorer and as a defender. It's undeniable with him. I think Thompson is the most talented prospect the Borderland has right now. I would put Thompson ahead of everybody else when you consider who he is as an athlete, the things that he can do on both ends, and the ability to keep improving. So the way that he marries a certain skill set and a certain athleticism makes him probably the most talented prospect that we have, and I think he's a true Division I talent, even though he's not getting Division I offers right now. Next, with that, he's an elite scorer. He'll probably lead the whole Borderland in points per game, regardless of district. Ysleta is moving down to 4A basketball, so I do not anticipate 4A basketball rather. So I do not anticipate this kid having a hard time putting the ball in the hoop. But even when he was playing against 2-5A competition last year, he did not have a hard time getting that done either. And he can score in many different ways. He's an elite athlete on the short list of best athletes in the area. Thompson is undeniably one of those. And like I said, 3-level scorer, can get it done. You can't necessarily shut him down. If the jump shot's not falling, he's going to get to the rim. He's going to take post touches. He's going to duck in. He's going to get to the free throw line. So if there's a part of his game that's not working or falling in a certain time, he'll adjust and he'll find a different way to score on you. And then next, he's a defensive playmaker. You know, is he the best defender? Is he the hardest working defender in the Borderland? No. But this kid can do some things defensively, again, that are very, very impressive. There's this one game last year that I saw him play, I believe it was a district game, where he had 4 blocks as the weak side defender. So coming over from the other side of the floor, shading over, and as the help defender, getting blocks. So, you know, the kid is aware of his surroundings, can make up space within a short distance and time, and, you know, can pick pockets, but, you know, can defend the rim, has good timing. So the defensive playmaking is absolutely there for Thompson. Growth areas, I would just say continual defensive effort. Again, I think this kid is the most talented prospect that we have. So to me, there's no reason why he can't be the most disruptive defender that this area has. So it's just seeing that, just, you know, playing with the same continual effort defensively. Now, I want to be clear. I'm not saying that he doesn't try defensively. That's not the case at all. But I think that he can maximize what he can do defensively. And some of that is effort-based. Next is playmaking. If there is an area in the half-court offense where I think Thompson still has room to grow, it's playmaking. He sees double teams more than other prospects that I've seen over this past year and a half. And so when you get double teamed, there are obvious playmaking opportunities that come out of that. And I think he can improve at reading double teams, reading defenders, and getting better shots for his teammates out of that. After that, I would say perimeter jump shooting. So again, if he can just become a little bit more proficient and efficient within his jump shooting, just forget about it. The kid's going to do whatever he wants from an offensive perspective. I don't think he's a bad jump shooter, but it's just getting a little bit more efficient is more what it is. Ball handling, though, I would say is an area where he can definitely improve. The handle can become a lot tighter, especially under pressure, and especially just in those chaotic transition fast break sequences that you see in high school basketball, where you really have to be alert of your surroundings, who's coming up from behind you, making sure you secure the ball. So I think he can improve there. And then lastly is no mercy. And what I mean by that is, so Ysleta is dropping down to 2-4A. And that's I would say, a significant change in competition level going from 2-5A to 2-4A. When you have a prospect like Thompson, ideally you would love to see him be playing against the best talent the area has to offer week in, week out. Some of the best teams in 5A, some of the best teams in 6A. That's not going to be the case this year down in 2-4A. So with that, I mean, show no mercy, dude. Like, there's nobody in that district that can guard you. There's nobody that can really play with you. So, not to say he needs to average X amount of points per game, because, points per game, you could be fooled by that. You can look at the stats and see, well, this kid averages 22 points per game. And then you go watch them in person, or you go put on the tape, and you come to find how they get those 22 a game. And it's not very impressive. So it's not that if he doesn't average X amount, he's failing, but there are going to be opportunities for him to feast at the 2-4A level. So he should. There should be no reason why he shouldn't. He was already close to being a 20-point scorer, if not a 20-point scorer last season as a junior in 2-5A. So the assumption, I mean, even if he still was playing in 2-5A, you would assume him to be a 20-point scorer as a senior year. So you can imagine the potential scoring outputs that he can have at the 2-4A level. So again, no mercy is not all simply about scoring as many points as possible. He should be dominant on both ends. But also just to put him on the map, because really, to me, this kid is a Division I talent. Does he end up playing D1 basketball after this year? That's not for me to say. But I think at the very least, if he continues to put in the work as he goes into his collegiate journey, I think he'll end up playing Division I basketball if he doesn't start there. But when you're playing down a district at the 2-4A level, take advantage. Is it the best competition? No. But that means that in turn, there's no excuse as to why you shouldn't be absolutely dominant. So no mercy from Thompson is kind of what I expect at the 2-4A level this year. And again, I don't really mean that as a disrespect to the prospects, teams, coaches at the 2-4A level, but there's a difference. There's just an obvious difference that if we're going to talk about basketball honestly, that's something that you have to acknowledge. So it's not to disrespect or put anybody down, but it's just to understand that this is one of the top prospects the Borderland has. He's immensely talented. And if he's going to play down a district, you have certain expectations of how that's going to go. Okay, last player from Tier 1, and then we're going to get out of here for today, folks. It's Lenny Washington from Oregon Mountain. Last season, I had him ranked 14th overall, 6th in the class of 2025, 4 in the positional rankings. I had him listed as a point guard. So, Washington, what makes this kid a Tier 1 talent? Number one, elite playmaker. I think he's the best playmaker that the Borderland has to offer. When you think about the transition fast break sequences within the game, I don't think there's a better person to have the ball in their hands than Washington, because of his playmaking and passing ability and doing it at 6'4", 6'5". So he's just out in transition, fast break sequences, remarkable to watch. Next, he's a defensive game changer. This kid can take over games defensively. He does not have to score the ball to impact the game whatsoever. And part of that is what he can do defensively. Last year, Oregon Mountain had one of the better pressing systems that I had seen. I would say only second to Chapin. Washington, along with Yanai Wilson from the class of 2024, just kind of did whatever they wanted defensively. Roaming out in space, on ball, weak side, so many areas where he could just absolutely blow up a play, absolutely blow up a possession. Just phenomenal in that regard and just playmaking on that end. He's an elite athlete. In my opinion, he's the best athlete in the Borderland. Again, I've already mentioned a few. Savion Jordan from Chapin, Azaiah Thompson from Ysleta. You talk to other people, you might get different answers, but you're going to come to players like that. And to me, Washington is the best. I saw him just do things athletically last year as a junior out in space that nobody else was doing in the Borderland outside of his teammate from last year, Yanai Wilson. So athletically, in a 6'4", 6'5" frame, and so in addition to that, he's an explosive finisher. So again, dunking is not everything. It counts the same as a layup, but when you find players with certain abilities and skill sets that are rare, you have to acknowledge that. So just like I talked about Cason Golding and his catch and shooting ability and his fluency in that regard, that's a special skill set that you have to acknowledge. People at the guard position who can finish above the rim and don't need much runway to do so, that's rare in this area. It simply is. So that matters. And then he's a positional mismatch. You do not have point guards in this area that are 6'4", 6'5", with his height and length. You just don't. When you have players of his height, 6'4", 6'5", they usually get stuck as a 4 or as a 5 or as an oversized wing, not a point guard. So positionally, he's just looms over everybody really in this area. Growth areas, the biggest one is staying healthy. He had knee issues last year. To my recollection, he did not get to finish his junior season, which was disappointing, or he didn't get to finish it completely because, Oregon Mountain was playing really important playoff basketball and they were the state runner-up last year. So ideally, when you get to that point in the season, you want your best players to be healthy, and he wasn't. He's playing football this year. He decided to play football this year. And I mean, no disrespect to football. It's a great sport. You always get nervous, though, when you think about a basketball prospect spending time on the football field, simply because football is a contact sport. It's inherently violent, and it is not kind to the lower extremities. And knowing that he already had knee injuries, it does make me nervous. So hopefully and ideally, he can be healthy come basketball season. Next is the perimeter jump shooting. When I watch Washington shoot the ball from the perimeter, it's not that the shooting mechanics are poor or the shot selection's bad, but it's certainly, if you're going to let him choose a shot to take, you want him to shoot the ball from the perimeter. And at least in the high school setting, he didn't seem all that confident from time to time. But whether he's confident or not, I think the shooting efficiency from the outside can greatly improve. And that was really just one of the general weak points for Oregon Mountain last year. Excellent team, had some of the best prospects in the area, not the best perimeter shooting team. So Washington and the team in general can improve there. Another is an uptick in volume. Oregon Mountain lost their two best players to graduation last season, Brandon Karras and Yanai Wilson. And those two were just phenomenal, had outstanding senior years. You could argue that in terms of production, Brandon Karras was the best player in the Borderland last year. And Yanai Wilson was not far behind him. Those two players gone, Oregon Mountain does have returning talent outside of Washington, but he is the guy. He's the guy for the Knights. So with that, there's going to be a assumed amount of increased shots taken, scoring load, all of those things that come along with being the best player. Next is defensive versatility. Again, you cannot understate the two players that Oregon Mountain graduated last year, how good they were overall in terms of their production, but more importantly, how pivotal they were defensively. So again, at 6'4", 6'5", being that explosive of an athlete, can you ask him to do maybe even more defensively, or maybe not more defensively, but just more in terms of his coverage or the positions he can guard? Maybe that's unfair. Maybe that's not realistic, but I think he can do it. I think he can basically guard positions 1 through 5 at the high school level in this area. So it'll be interesting to see if he does that from time to time. And then lastly, for Washington, it's just an aggressive mentality of playing the game of basketball. Similar to Azaiah Thompson from Ysleta, it's just, I mean, the potential is there to just dominate. So go out and do it. Be aggressive. You know, he's obviously a great playmaker. He's not selfish with the ball, and they have a lot of other talent still coming back on Oregon Mountain. But when you're the best player with that type of upside, with those physical attributes, be aggressive. Have that mentality. Show no mercy on your opponents. And, you know, I just think so highly of this kid. So why not? Because again, you know, if he improves on the areas that he improves on, but more importantly, he can stay healthy. This is a D1 talent. He's not being recruited at that level yet, but he has that upside, in my opinion. Okay, folks, if you've made it to this point, thank you so much for listening and watching. I know that was a ton. I talked about and broke down as many top prospects as I could, and trying to do it in a certain time frame. So I appreciate it if you made it this far. And again, you know, these tiers are not finite. They're not rigid. You can talk to people that know way more about basketball in this area who will have certain players in a different tier or vice versa, and that's totally valid. So this is not a definitive list, and it will look different come the end of the 2024-25 season. So please keep that in mind. And then, of course, look out for the next episode where I break down the girls' prospects. I'm going to do it in a very different way, but I'm still going to find a way to talk about the best girls high school basketball players. So if you enjoyed this episode or any of the content that I've produced, please subscribe to my Substack. I'll have a link below in the description. And of course, with the podcast, please, if you can subscribe, like, comment, share, that only helps grow this project. And by growing the project, I can do more with it. But regardless of what you do, I appreciate your time. Thank you for listening. I'll catch you next time.